Good afternoon, everyone. If I could just have your attention for the next hour or so. Thank you for coming. I know it's a tough day to be getting around campus. And as a public service announcement, could you please make sure your phones are turned to buzz or whatever it is. Don't let them ring. We all know how to do that now. That's the one thing we can't get right. So today, on behalf of the Diversity Committee, I'm really pleased to introduce Paulette Granberry-Russell. She's our speaker, and she's going to be talking about understanding implicit bias and microaggressions. And I'm her next case study.
He really is.
It's hard to admit that, but Paulette joined Michigan State University in 1998 as a senior advisor to the president for diversity and the director of the Office for Inclusion and Intercultural Initiatives. Their office is responsible for facilitating MSU's efforts to advance a diverse and inclusive university environment that includes over 50,000 students and over 12,000 employees through cross-cultural education and development programs, community outreach, workforce diversity initiatives, campus climate assessments, and support for faculty of color and diversity scholars through the Diversity Research Network. That's a mouthful. She leads various all-university committees responsible for campus diversity efforts that support university compliance with federal, state, and non-discrimination laws and regulations. Granberry-Russell was an integral part of the National Science Foundation, we have to figure this out, Advancing Diversity through the Alignment of Policies and Practices program at MSU, designed to increase the participation of women in science, technology, engineering, and math careers in higher education. She's also an officer of the Board of Directors for the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education. She is chair of the association's annual conference planning committee that has been instrumental in professional development of over 600 diversity officers representing more than 250 colleges and universities. She presents across the country and internationally, this is really impressive, including work in South Africa, Tanzania, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Brazil, and the United Kingdom on equal opportunity, affirmative action, gender equity, and strategies for retaining a diverse workforce and creating inclusive work and learning environments. And most importantly, she's a licensed attorney in the state of Michigan, and she also consults on labor and employment law matters. And her greatest accomplishment is being the mother of Ronnie and Kat, who every day inspire her to be her best self. Thank you for coming, Paulette.
Thank you. And good afternoon. Because I face, and I don't know if that's just a product of the legal training, but it is certainly what I do, and I do it all the time, and I'm grateful to be here. I am appreciative of the fact that all of you chose to brave the rain, which, soaked my back, but I'm glad to be here and see all of you. I will be getting ice cream after this is over. And I want to especially thank the committee that was so gracious in sending the invitation to me to be here today. And I was told I have 1 hour, and I have more than 1 hour of slides. So, for those of the committee that are here, do you mind just raising your hand so that your colleagues, there's a lot of you, wow, and I didn't meet all of you. So for those of you on the committee, thank you for doing this work. Okay? Higher Ed, thanks you for doing this work. UConn, thanks you for doing this work, because I can assure you, I'm a practitioner, okay? I am someone who takes other people's work and puts it into practice. I'm one of those individuals who often finds herself counseling, whether it's our students, whether it's our faculty, whether it's our staff, on how we create these more inclusive learning environments that we all want to, I think, advance on our campuses. How do we infuse diversity in the curriculum? How do we make our classroom spaces more accessible, not only for those with disabilities, but accessible in all respects? How do we talk about pronouns? We had a little bit of a conversation today on pronouns, and when's the appropriate time to at least incorporate them, perhaps in your syllabus or other ways of engaging with our students. It's about everything we do. And when we talk about diversity, I often want to make sure that people understand how we're defining diversity today. It's not the ways in which we used to define it in my earlier parts of my career in the context of increasing gender, racial, ethnic diversity on our campus. Then it expanded to persons with disabilities, and now we make sure that we're inclusive, at least as our federal contractors who receive federal dollars, we've got to make sure that we're providing access and opportunities to our veterans as well. And now we think about our LGBTQA community and what they expect. But then we also have to remind ourselves of the unfinished business related to gender discrimination, racial, ethnic discrimination. All of those things are a part of the work that we're expected to do. So when I look around this room, as I am currently, and I always do this, when I go into a space, I'm looking. I'm very conscious of who's in the space. But I also recognize that I should make no assumptions about who's in the space. So the things that we're going to talk about today in this context of implicit bias and microaggressions, I always want to start and frame it. Be sure that you understand that when you walk into a space, you never know anything about the people that are sitting there. Yes, I can look and I can see gender, racial, ethnic diversity. I'm going to assume there's probably ability diversity in this space. There may be a few veterans. I'm certain that there's political diversity, political ideology diversity in this space. Probably sexuality, gender identity, things that I may not be able to see based on what I see represented here, but I'm going to assume nothing. And I can also assume that there's a point at which in this discussion that I may offend, and I hope that I don't do that. But I also try to model what I hope others will do, okay? Which is if I do, if you're not inclined to share that with me, please understand that I will apologize, and I do apologize. Because I'm very comfortable talking about race. I'm very comfortable talking about diversity in its broadest senses and in its narrowest senses, because that's what I do. But I also recognize that I'm also someone who comes from a certain cultural lens that from time to time is not as clear about all of the ways in which people exist in the world. And so I have to also say, if I err, I hope that you will forgive me. I hope I don't err, but if I do, I set the stage. And I'm always comfortable if someone comes up to me afterwards and talks to me about that, because it's important for me to understand that there are times when I do err, or there may be times in which certain assumptions were made about what I said, and then I can help clarify. All right? So, everybody's set, ready, go. All right. Microaggressions. No, I'm just learning objectives. Mike is a hoot. I didn't realize that until we had coffee this morning and fruit, and he had bacon. And I said, no more bacon for Mike. All right, learning objectives. When I talk about these things, it's clearly the lens through which we see and experience the world, and how those lenses can be tinged with our own unconscious, implicit bias. When I talk about unconscious bias, implicit bias, clearly it's those things that we may not be aware about ourselves. How many of you have had training or workshops on implicit bias and microaggressions? Okay. So I've got a room of people that really understand it. So if I were to ask someone that's not on the committee to define for me, if you raise your hand, what do we mean by implicit bias or unconscious bias, you could answer the question for me. Is there a brave soul that's willing to do that? Uh-huh. You're not on the committee.
I need to chair the committee.
I want
a long
to...
time ago.
Oh, okay. Yep. Okay. Well, yes.
Well, it's basically from your own experience, how you choose to make friends, how you choose to evaluate situations, and you don't know that you're really making those choices and why that person, what attracts you to them is implicit in your own experience.
That's right. And so when I talk about unconscious, it's a lack of awareness. Okay? But it's a result of a whole range of experiences that I've had over the course of my lifetime. And those experiences and my own background, cultural background, at least in terms of where I grew up, how I was raised, how I identify, all of those things influence the way in which I function in this world and the way that I respond and react to others. Yes. I hope that you walk away with an understanding of how bias and discrimination create barriers for full participation. And if I talk about full participation, what do I mean by that? When I talk about creating an inclusive space, what do I mean by that? I'm talking about a space and full participation where others feel as though they're welcome, that their voice is heard, that they're supported, that they're valued, that they're respected. And there are times when we walk in this world where, you know, I may not feel as welcome. Sometimes when I walk into a space, and again, I said earlier, I'm very comfortable talking about race. I identify as an African-American woman, but sometimes folks aren't quite sure because of the complexion, the lighter my skin is. And so some people make assumptions about who I am, or they're curious about who I am. But when I walk into a space, I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone that is from my community, and when I talk about my community, I'm talking about the African-American community. And when I don't see anyone, or very few in this space, if there is anyone that's African-American, or someone that I believe to be black, what do I do? Hey, you know exactly what I'm doing, right? I'm connecting with someone I will assume identifies as black. Maybe, maybe they don't. And again, as I said, I'm very comfortable. Sorry if I made you uncomfortable. Or sorry if you're uncomfortable. You're okay. Because we also had a part of our conversation, if I made you feel uncomfortable. And in this context, I wasn't sure if you didn't say anything. But again, my point is when I walk into a space, I'm trying to figure out, do I fit in this space? Will I be comfortable in this space? And what assumptions could I make if I'm in a space that's filled with white people? That maybe I'm the other, maybe there are certain perceptions that they will have of me, maybe they won't. But I'm walking in and I have that kind of guarded way of being until I determine whether or not, as I did this morning, find out if I was going to feel welcome and supported. And last night when I arrived and I felt welcome and supported, now we're all friends. Well, we'll evolve into friends, but I think there's a certain amount of trust that came as a result of our discussions with each other. So this whole idea of how do we create an inclusive environment is what I want to spend some time talking with you about, because it's important for us to understand the benefits, okay? Because if I don't feel included in a space, if I don't feel welcomed in a space, if I'm assuming that at any point I may perceive bias or I may experience bias, and that bias may impact what? Opportunities that I might have or not have, then I'm not sure that I will have a commitment to the space. Do I want to stay at UConn if I don't feel welcome and supported? Or if every day in the course of my existence I'm feeling as though I have to really do everything within my means to protect myself from feeling as though I'm treated differently? I want a sense of belonging here. I want a sense of that belonging that then leads to a commitment and keeping me in this space. I want camaraderie. I want climate and this space to be felt as supportive because that impacts my morale. Okay? And if I've got a poor, if I'm feeling bad, or if others are in the space and they're feeling bad, and it doesn't always have to be around the ways in which we identify, but you know what happens when you feel bad in a space, right? What do? Exit, right? I want to capitalize on talents, ideas, and collaborative problem solving, because in the absence of Paulette participating in the space, you don't get Paulette's cutting edge visions of what she's capable of bringing to UConn, right? All right? And what are we looking for? We want innovation. We want to capitalize on talent and ideas. But if I'm feeling shut down in this space, you're not going to get that. It helps to reduce conflict, because what happens when we're at odds with one another? Regardless of whether it is because within our discipline or within our work environment, we're expected to engage in rigorous debate, right? Because that helps to generate a lot of creative, innovative, cutting-edge research, scholarship, et cetera, right? But there's a difference between that and my not feeling valued as a woman scholar, right? Or as a scholar of color, or as an international scholar, right? Or as a person whose sexuality or gender identity is different from others, and somehow there's conflict and tension in the space. We want trust. And we also know that sometimes being in spaces where it's a little bit stressful, you don't get my best self. And to the extent that that goes on for any protracted period of time, it can impact one's physical health and well-being. So that's what this is all about. What provides the lens through which we find meaning? All right? We know, we talk about social groups, we talk about social identities, people who share a range of physical, cultural, social characteristics within one of the social identity categories. I mentioned to you earlier, my social identity category is race. I'm a member, I identify as a member of the Black African American community, right? So that's my social group. Others of you, I may also identify based on religion. I always say born and raised Catholic. Those of you who are Catholic, you understand what I mean by that. But there were occasions when I felt as though, the church and I were having our issues, so I go back and forth. But I typically identify. My sexual orientation, heterosexual. My age, I don't want to go elder, I'm in an adult. Yes, unapologetically a baby boomer, but it's hard to acknowledge that, I may be moving over to the elder side. That's where my Ronnie and Kat place me. But that's when I say respect your elders. All right, and then my native language, English. I wish I spoke more than one language. I made sure that my children did. Body size, well, it used to be kind of petite, but now it's probably moving to, do I want to honor plus size? What happens when I do? What if I'm perceived as on the plus size? We're going to talk about that. Marital status, education, citizenship status, all of those things are social identity categories. But we also know that with social group status, okay, group status, let's go back to what I meant by group status, social group, and then status. Groups with more social power, privileged, oppressed, advantaged, minoritized, dominant group, group that faces oppression, groups with privilege, group that is oppressed, agent, target. The point is, folks, that even if we fall into many groups with social power, okay, I have class power today, I have heterosexual power today, I have Christian power and privilege, yes, but I'm also one of those individuals as a woman. I may feel that I am in a minoritized group, and I could say oppressed depending on what the circumstances are. Certainly as an African American woman, I feel oftentimes oppressed, okay, and oftentimes very empowered as well. But it doesn't mean that we don't have struggles in our lives because of my class privilege, as well as others of you. So I choose to put this in front of you for you to perhaps better understand and appreciate the ways in which bias and our experiences as a result of being within an identified social group that may fall into that minoritized or oppressed category. Groups with less power, what are some of the experiences that we have that might then influence how we perceive our value in our space? All right? And I understand that I will be making this PowerPoint available to the group so they can share with you later. Standpoint, multiple identities intersect. So I've given you plenty of examples about intersectionality, right? So anyone confused about intersectionality? Okay, fabulous. But it does influence how I see the world around me, how I interact with others. That's my lens. My lens can lead to bias, both explicit and implicit. One of the biases that I have is age. Okay, and even as I've moved closer to the elder side of the spectrum, I also recognize that there are times that I am, when I'm driving, you know where I'm going, right? Somebody in front of me is driving really, really slow. What's my first instinct? Old. And I'm getting frustrated and I start feeling like, it's time for you to get off the road, not realizing at some point someone will be saying that about me. But I recognize that I have that bias, and sometimes I'm very explicit about it, but I also have to recognize that there are ways in which I function in this world because I do the work that I do. But I have a position of power on my campus. And if I recognize that I have this bias on age, and if I'm sitting in a position where I'm determining who has a job and who doesn't, who do you think I might very well impact if I have an age bias? You know the answer to that. And if I have an age bias, and if I act on that bias, and I'm discriminating against someone on the basis of their age, that's when we call the other Paulette and say, Paulette, I think we've got an issue of age discrimination. All right? Because it's ways in which we can, it's not that our biases always lead to discriminatory behavior, but they very well can, all right? So the intersectionalities, we all have ways in which we identify ourselves very differently based on race, religious beliefs, etc. And anybody recognize this one? I see you nodding. Do you remember this? Okay. What was that one all about?
I don't quite know her name, but it's one of the Kardashians, or one of them. And there was a protest, and in the commercial she brought a Pepsi can to the police officers, and that stopped all the entire protest.
That's right. It ran for one day, and the world went nuts and said, now Pepsi, surely you can do better than this. What was on your mind to think that somehow this would be appropriate? Pepsi apologized for a controversial ad that borrowed imagery from the Black Lives Matter. Now come on, this was, I think it was done in 2017, April of 2017. They borrowed the imagery from the Black Lives Matter movement after a day of intense criticism from people who said it trivialized the widespread protest against the killings of black people by the police. I want to know who was sitting with Pepsi when they created this ad, or who wasn't sitting with Pepsi when they created this ad. Okay? So it was, current activists said at the time, precisely the opposite of their real-world experience of protesting police brutality. All right? So Pepsi snatched it quickly, but what do you think it did for Pepsi's reputation? Maybe a little bit of harm? Anybody remember this one?
Oh, my God.
Yes. This was the one that, someone, how your own news feed on Facebook, because at my age, we're only allowed to be on Facebook. Although I do have a Twitter account now, but I can't Instagram or the other things because they don't want me seen or heard. All right, but this one got to me, and I was shocked. I got to acknowledge that I was absolutely, almost lost my mind. It's one of those moments where the top of your head wants to blow off. Coolest monkey in the jungle. Now, go back to what I was saying earlier about the lens through which we see the world. All right? My lens as an African-American woman who was born in the 50s, late 50s, okay, but born in the 50s nonetheless, lived through the civil rights movement with my mother and my grandmother who was raised by former slaves. Okay, so I've had the experiences of understanding my culture, the history. They came up from the South, Jim Crow, imagery of black people, monkeys, 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 black face, white lips. L. Jolson, anybody from that era remember? Not many of you, but there's a few. Okay, black face, white lips, monkey, monkey, monkey. And I saw this, there's nothing about putting a coolest monkey in the jungle hoodie on a black child that's cool. That's okay. At least for me. And apparently for others. This was H&M in January 2018. They apologized for an image appearing on its online store that showed a black child model wearing a hooded sweatshirt that said coolest monkey. They removed it and said it would also pull the shirt from its stores worldwide. The image was widely criticized online for its reference to a monkey, an animal that has been long featured in racial and ethnic slurs. In a statement, H&M said, it agreed with those who were upset about the image. We are deeply sorry that the picture was taken, and we also regret the actual print. Therefore, we have not only removed the image from our channels, but also the garment from our product offering globally. Smart thing to do. All right. And it goes on. Anybody see this one? Yeah. They showed a black woman removing her brown shirt to reveal a smiling white woman in a crisp white shirt underneath. How about Zara in 2014, selling a children's shirt after criticism that it resembled the Nazi concentration camp uniforms? It's like, wait a minute, who's not sitting in those spaces when these things are happening, right? Okay. And it's like, how does this happen? All right, Inclusion in business. At least 20% of companies in the U.S. offer unconscious bias training. That's why we're having this conversation today. Estimated to hit 50% in the next several years. Almost all big tech firms offer them, and these numbers are increasing. All right? In order for inclusion to work, it's got to be centered within an organization, not necessarily relegated to HR. And it's not to disparage or denigrate HR, but it's to say that this work extends well beyond that. In a campus environment, we know that it's not just about workforce diversity and making us feel good about being in this space. It's everything. It's our climate, it's our curriculum, it's our research, it's our leadership, it's accountability, it's our external engagement, everything. Because if we don't, wow, remember this? Starbucks shutting down all U.S. stores for racial bias training. Our campus had 3 Starbucks stores. They shut them down, and our office did the training for the Starbucks employees on our campus. All right? When these things happen, it harms the reputation. It harms the individuals. It harms the reputation. It harms communities beyond the individuals, okay, that may identify within that community. But it also harms those who regard themselves as allies and supporters of creating these inclusive spaces that we talk about. All right, so we're going to move on here. Definitions of bias, strongly held beliefs favoring or not. They can be conscious or unconscious. It influences our interactions, as I've demonstrated to you. Benefits some and disadvantages others, and we all have them. And I always have to remind people that when we talk about this work, that we all have them, right? I've acknowledged mine. I acknowledge them every day. I kind of flirt with them on occasion. We were talking about being in an airplane. I'm going to use this example. And I had this experience yesterday, you know, how tight it is in a plane, right? And I saw a really big guy coming down the aisle, and he was. And I mean, he was really big. He had a beautiful kind of light blue shirt on, but all I saw was how big he was and that there was a middle seat next to me that was open. The window seat was gone. I was on the aisle seat, and I saw this person. And I went there, and I kept thinking, Lord, please don't let him sit next to me. And then I said, as I was talking with this at lunch, I said, I very consciously had to catch myself and say, Paulette, okay, as she talks to herself, come on, you know what to do. If he sits next to you, get up, let him sit down. And then if you feel a little cramp, you know what to do. You just lean over to the left. You got the aisle, all right? And if you're on that side, you just move over a little bit here. And so everybody has a right to be on this plane. And it wasn't that I was ashamed of myself. It was a recognition that in that moment, at that time, I knew exactly what I was doing. And I said, that's not cool, all right? And it's one of those slap yourself and say, behave. All right. So when we talk about our explicit biases, our implicit, for me, it was unspoken, but it was very clear to me that I had a preference. And I could have prioritized that person's place. And I just about did. It's like, I want to know, did you pay for 2 seats? I mean, really, where my mind took me was just, you think about it and it's like, ah, yuck. That's not how I want to regard myself. It's kind of ugly, you know? But that's where I went. Marginalizes others? Absolutely I did. Absolutely I did. And the question is, how would I have behaved if the person had sat next to me? Okay? We judge ourselves by our intent. Others judge us by our impact. Okay? So had I behaved in a particular way towards this person that would have been different than had he not been as large as he was? I don't know. Right? Characteristics of implicit bias. They are pervasive. They are robust. We all have them. And it may contradict our declared beliefs. I talk about age being a consideration for me, any bias that I have. I also come from a community where we revere our elders, and we respect them, and we hold them on a pedestal. All right? And that's probably true for many of you as well. But if I were to act on my the bias, then it is a contradiction of what I've said is a value, okay? I tend to favor my own group. I know who my people are. And I know if I act on that bias, what I may impact others as a result of. So if I'm looking for women in a space, and if I'm inclined, based on the power and privilege that I have as a person with authority that is in decision-making role all the time, I can lean one way, right? And I do, you know? And I'm very conscious of it when it happens. And then I have to check myself and say, Paulette, pull it back, right? So, those are the things that we have to, again, be very conscious of. I do tend to favor my own group. And that group can cover other identities: gender, race, religion, etc. Marginalized group members often share the same implicit biases. Yes, I acknowledge that. If I regard myself as marginalized, if I put myself in that oppressed social group as I did earlier, I can share the same implicit biases because we're going to find out a little bit more about how I can do that. Okay, I'm not going to go through the science here, but this is important for us to understand. Primitive regions of the brain associated with fear. What happens when we fear? Freeze, fight, flight. Okay? Our brain fills in any gaps of information. So if over the course of my lifetime, I've had certain experiences with certain groups, all right? And if my experience with that social group is one that I find to have been negative, my brain is telling me either freeze, fight, flight. Paulette's a fight person first. And so my response might be, I try not to be a physical fighter, but I find other ways to show my disapproval, all right? Sometimes I'll back down, but most often I'm going into that place where that primitive region of my brain says, you know what, Paulette, you're going to have to respond in a particular way here. Write down the first word that comes to mind. We don't have time for writing. But if I use the word engineer, what's the first thing you think about?
Geek.
What's that?
Geek.
Geek. All right, geek.
My
And
son-in-law's one.
all right.
White.
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 Geek.
White.
Male.
Male. Most folks, yeah. I'll be honest with you. My first was male, white, then geek. You know, and then I think about, once I say male, I said, okay, and what's the second thing? Describe that person for me. Usually white. How old? Engineer, probably mid-30s, 40s maybe, you know, and I go through that whole way of kind of analyzing. So again, it's this notion of our bias, sometimes with just a word. Now this I found interesting. I look like an engineer, hashtag. My team is great, everyone is smart, creative, and hilarious. That just blew my own stereotypes of engineer, right? And then this person identifies by ISIS, who is a platform engineer. Now, you can't read what's there, perhaps, but let me read to you where that arrow is pointing down. This was posted originally by this guy, as someone posted. This is some weird haphazard branding. I think they want to appeal to women, but are probably appealing to dudes. But I'm curious, people with brains find this quote remotely plausible. And if women in particular buy this image of what a female engineer looks like, I don't know, weird. And the one that followed that is, what does a female software engineer look like? It's worth noting that ISIS is also a female software engineer. But it's interesting how the social media here took off on this one. You know, it was an ad, but then folks started commenting. And then if you look at this, yeah, there's one here.
Are they complaining that she looks too much like a model?
Yes. And here's
Like she's
one.
too pretty or?
Yeah. If their intention is the very last one that's posted, if their intention is to attract more women, then it would have been a better choice, better to choose a picture with a warm, friendly smile rather than a sexy smirk. Is that a sexy smirk? I don't know. My lens is very different than apparently that person's. You know, I would not have said it was sexy or smirky, but hey, that's the cultural lens through which I see the world. But, you know, it was one to get people having a conversation, all right? And where does this all come from? Direct and indirect messages. We all get them every day of our lives. It's evident at a very young age. It comes from our family, our peers, our colleagues, the folks that you probably hang out with. And sometimes those messages can be distorted, but they are reinforced over time and they become internalized, such that infant development, if an infant's primary caregiver is a female, they prefer to look at females versus male faces within weeks. So how early is this happening? Very early. If we talk about able to tell their own race faces apart compared to two other races, yeah, 9 months. And it goes on. 7 to 10-year-olds. Ages 5, 7, and 10 were asked to rate the severity of pain that they believe will be felt by other children of the same gender in different situations, and that should be same age in different situations, such as bumping their head or slamming a hand in a door. At least at 5, they rated the severity of the pain the same, regardless of the race. But 7 and 10-year-olds, that hurt. At 7 and 10, they tended to rate the pain as being less severe than when they were shown pictures of white children, when they were looking at pictures of black kids. 7 to 10. So what kind of messages were children getting to believe that the pain was less? The pain that I felt, or the pain that another African American child might feel, is less severe than it would be for them. What is that all about? All right. The unconscious mind. Familiar with this? Yeah. Okay, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but system 1, the automatic processing. This is what typically happens to us on a day-to-day basis. We're thinking fast, we're relying on the information that we've received over time. It's almost intuitive, it's almost impulsive, and it is. And then it's the system 2 that I hope we begin to think more about, as I did when I was on that plane. I slow myself down, I try to be more deliberate, and way more in terms of looking at all of the factors here, rather than act on any assumptions that I might have and biases that I have. When does bias emerge? Well, we know. When I'm talking, no. When I'm tired, if I'm in a high emotional state, when I have a lot on my minds, if I'm rushing to get someplace and I'm driving my car and someone is slow in front of me, that's when those other thoughts begin to flood my head. Okay? It's automatic processing. How does it impact our behavior? We know that. Okay? Sometimes you call, you're trying to get your cable fixed and someone on the other line or get a bill taken care of, and you know that you're being transferred to some outsourced company that's in a different country where everyone speaks with a heavy accent, and I'm trying to hurry up and get something done, and I can't because I want to see what's This Is Us, and my cable is down. And I'm freaking out, and I want it fixed, and I want it fixed now. Can you give me someone who speaks English? Or do I slow myself down enough to say, Paulette, stop? Okay? That's how it impacts our behavior. Maybe I become a little testy as I'm talking to the person who I think can't really understand what I need because they have an accent. All right? We go there. Okay? All right. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have you do 3 of these, if you've got a pen and paper. And if you don't, just work with us here.
I have some of these. I don't have a pen on me.
Ready? I'll give you 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. And I'm not going to give you 10 seconds because I want the first word that comes to your mind. I don't want you censoring your thoughts. Just please do what I'm asking you to do. All right? First word. If you can do 3, that's great. you had time, I have about 14 of these. But I just want to give a few responses, if you're comfortable, okay? Usually what I ask you to do is pair and share, but we don't have time. Any thoughts? Anyone brave enough to say what was the first word you wrote down for this person? Yes?
Man.
Man. Yes, perhaps? Yes?
Bored.
Bored. All right. All those books? I wonder. Yes, sir.
Educated.
Educated. Yes.
Sour.
Sour. Okay, let me tell you about this UIC professor. Filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court in Chicago. Claims that after the Korean-born U.S. citizen was fired from his tenure-track position at his university in 2011 and reinstated months later, he experienced years of discrimination and retaliation due to his race and national origin. He was ostracized, denied raises comparable to his peers in the Department of Political Science. He also said he was forced to teach courses in statistics for which he is not qualified because one department official said Asians, especially Koreans, are very good at mathematics and statistics. He claims in court documents that he was forced to teach a course in Korean politics despite having no formal education in the field. A lot of assumptions there. Some biases, perhaps. Some of them not so implicit, maybe explicit. All right, let's take a quick look. Yeah. Thoughts, words. Anyone? Pretty. Pretty? Okay. Yes.
Happy.
Happy? Oh. All right, let's tell you about her. Coordinator of International Admissions and Recruitment at the University of Michigan. Seen on campus in 2015. Amid the high level of harassment, threats, and vandalism directed at American Muslims and at mosques, Muslim women are intensely debating the duty and risk related to wearing their head coverings as usual. Okay. Bias. Who's our friend here? Thoughts?
Hot.
All right, we'll have that discussion later, Sarah. Okay. All right. Nothing like open. Yes, sir?
I know who it is, so it isn't.
Okay, you want to tell us who that is?
So he does a lot of research with the effects of different drugs, illicit drugs, and has really taken the field in a direction that wasn't research-based before.
So he has quite a bit of, he is a chair and Dirk Ziff Professor of Psychology at Columbia. His book, High Price, A Neuroscientist's Journey of Self-Discovery That Challenges Everything You Know About Drugs and Society. Thank you. An amazing scholar, but sometimes people will look at that and they say dreads. I'm not quite sure he's somebody I could trust, but you know what? He has that kind of shirt that looks pressed, maybe. So I'm not quite sure. Whatever stereotypes I have, I'm not quite sure he may be blowing them up. All right?
So I wrote hair in blue shirt, one of my 2 words.
That's the first thing you notice. And depending on how you view hair, it can help or it can hurt. All right. So you get the point. This person, I just be curious. Thoughts? How about her? Yes, ma'am.
Graduate.
Graduate of
High school.
high school.
Oh, I know college. She was sitting on a bench that you always see at a college.
Yeah.
All right.
College.
Well, it's Dr., but we're close, Margaret Pocock. MBE is a space scientist and honorary fellow research associate at UCL Department of Physics and Astronomy, a presenter on the BBC Sky at Night program. Nigerian parents, raised in Camden, North London, da-da-da-da. Okay? So again, for some of us, as we say in my culture, black don't crack now. But to say she looks very youthful, yeah. And how might we treat her if we saw her?
I'm to be very happy. I wrote graduate and I wrote daughter.
Yeah.
I thought it was a picture.
And I appreciate that, because for me, that's a warm way of seeing her. But also underestimating potentially who she is and acting on that. And how might she feel as a scholar. All right, so you get the point. If we had time, I'd share this with you, but we don't. But for those of you who are familiar with the implicit association test, are you familiar with it? All right. They just recently received, September 13, the 2018 Golden Goose Awards. Anybody know what the Golden Goose Awards are? Okay. This is from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The award honors federal funded work that is, in the words of the association, may have been considered silly, odd, or obscured when first conducted, but has resulted in significant benefits to society. If you've not taken the implicit association test, here's what its purpose is and how you can access it. Web-based, measures strength of biases, over 14 million. In the video, one of the creators of implicit bias test said, you know, when we put it on the web, we thought maybe we'd get 450 people that would participate in it. They said 48,000 in 1 month. And now we're at over 14 million participants. Okay? Uses reaction times to measure how quickly people associate concepts. Pairing, good, bad, black, bad, white, good. Gay, clumsy, straight, athletic, etc. They're taken to indicate stronger unconscious associations. And when we talk about implicit biases, that's what this is all about. The consequences of, and I like to go through this quickly. When we have our biases and we act on them, there are things that happen that we may not intend to happen, but indeed they do. And what I was saying earlier today is that our biases have consequences, and sometimes those consequences can be significant. Sometimes they may seem minor, but in this instance, and as the research in this area evolves, here's what we're finding out. Non-black teachers have significantly lower expectations of black students than they do black teachers. It was greatest for black male students. We're doing quite a bit now about African American males and student success. And that's true for Latino males as well, Latinos as well. The discrepancy was greatest in this case for black male students. When a white or other non-white, non-black teacher and a black teacher evaluate the same black students, look at what the outcomes are. Okay? Are 30% less likely to believe that the student will graduate from a four-year college. And if I don't believe that you're going to graduate from college, what does that mean in terms of that student's interactions with me or their experiences in my classroom? Who gets attention, who does not? Why is it that girls, at least in some point in our history, were steered away from the sciences? Okay? Why were girls not as strong as boys and therefore, told, well, you may be able to run track, but you can't pole vault? I was told in '72 that I couldn't pole vault because I didn't have upper body strength. In 2014, my daughter competed for regional and state competitions for what sport? Pole vault. Yeah, she's a bad sister. Okay. All right. So, teacher bias and gender. Spend up to 2/3 of their time talking to male students. Okay? And the list goes on. More likely to ask boys questions that require critical thinking. Okay? And the list goes on. We know how weight is interpreted by people. Prevalence of weight discrimination has increased significantly, especially against women. Okay? Employment. Here's one that we all talk about in our work. Black sounding names, white sounding names. Emily and Greg and Lakeisha and Jamal. Who gets callbacks? Well, you can probably guess. At a higher rate, it's going to be Emily and Greg and not Lakeisha and Jamal. And even when you enhance the quality of their resumes, same impact. Okay? Whites receive an average 36% more callbacks than African Americans, 24% more than Latinos. And this was doing a meta-analysis of every field experiment on race and ethnic discrimination in the labor force from '89 to 2015, 24 years. Nothing has really changed. Okay? Hiring applications. Again, faculty more likely to respond to white males. All right. And again, would-be graduate students since letters to faculty members, etc. Names on the letters: Brad, Anderson, Keisha Thomas, Raj Singh, Mei Chen, or Juanita Martinez? Who do you think got fewer calls? Usually folks say maybe Keisha and Juanita. And it's actually Raj and Mei Chen. Fewer calls. Asian. Question might be, is there a little bit of other kinds of bias going on? Something to think about, okay? And here's the individual that we were talking about earlier, Jack Davidio. Okay. This is one of his pieces that was at the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Male applicants rated as significantly more competent and hireable than the identical female applicant. Wow. Offered higher starting salary. Yeah. It should be male. Male applicants rated significantly more competent, and they were offered higher salaries than the female. It should be then the female. Okay. And again, we can go on. Stereotypes, threat, consequences of discrimination, you know what those can be. Stress impacts our lives. Microaggressions. Give me a microaggression.
Turn your back on someone.
Turning your back. Okay.
You look really smart for a woman.
You're really smart for a woman.
Your English is so good.
Your English is so good.
You people.
You people. Well, you're stronger than me, so why don't you reach up there? Would that be a microaggression?
Depends.
Yeah, possibly. The assumption is, as a male, one, you can reach, two, you're strong, maybe I prefer not to, whatever, yeah. Body language, oftentimes microaggressions, when we talk about this word, it's usually those that are directed at minoritized groups, especially, because over the course of their lifetime, issues around stereotypes, subtle and not so subtle. What was yours again?
Turn your back on someone.
Turn your back on someone. So if I'm coming in this direction and I'm, just completely ignore it, right? I'm going straight over here, and then I hold a conversation with you. Because I make the assumption that obviously you're someone that I would be more inclined to be engaged with, and I'm a woman. Remember when I said sometimes we can show disfavor and disadvantage to our own because of the learned association I feel over time is that most likely what I'm going to hear from you will be of more value and greater value to me than what I might hear from you. All right. Body language, voice tone, facial expressions, those things like, referring to African American student as articulate. Why is that a problem? Generally not. The assumption is, as an African American, you probably are not as articulate. What did Joe Biden say about Barack Obama when he was running for president? Something about being articulate. It's like, oh my, Joe, I was so hurt. Okay. U.S.-born Asian American student complimented speaking such good English. Someone else said that. Where are you from? No, really, where are you from? Someone who is mixed race is asked, what are you? I get asked that all the time. And I say I'm African American, and I say I'm black. They say, really? Really? I say, yeah, I am. And then well, are you biracial? I said, my mother's black, my father's black. What else do you want to know? I can take you all the way back to the transatlantic slave trade. You want me to take you there? I could, but I don't ever do that unless I'm really feeling fatigued. Mispronouncing names.
I have a question about that, because
Yes.
I've been guilty of mispronouncing
Yeah.
many a student's name, right? So
Yes.
if you see a name and you know you're gonna stumble over it, because I would think it also would be a microaggression to say, pronounce your name for me, or, I mean, how do you handle that and not make it a microaggression, right?
How about if I ask the room? Would you be okay with that?
I just ask people, how do you say your name?
How do you pronounce your name?
Is that
Well, let's hold. Let's get a few more.
I do take responsibility, so one of the things that I like to do is to say, it's important to me that I pronounce your name correctly. Do you mind telling me how to correctly pronounce your name so that I can say it correct, so that I can say it right?
Yes.
So like saying it's on me to do it, not on you to tell me.
Right. Others? Yes.
Depending on the size of the classroom, I typically have students all speak their own name first.
Yes. And then, what I might do, if I'm having difficulties with the name, I will actually engage with that student and say, I apologize, I'm having difficulty with my own ability to pronounce your name. Do you mind if we work on this together? Or I might ask the student after, okay? When I do this kind of workshops, and I do it for large engineering classes from time to time, and I will ask. And then if I'm engaged, what I try and do is help the other students. I especially do this because we have a huge student population that's international on our campus, and the high number of those students are from China. And what's their name? John. What's your name, Mary? What's your name? I don't know. James. Jim. And, you know, then I'll ask, okay, is that your family name? You know, and I always, if I do this, I always let folks know, I'm gonna engage with you, and you can always disengage or not engage with me if you are more comfortable with that. And I can generally tell if someone's not comfortable. But if they're comfortable, I say, well, do you mind, is that your family's name? Well, no. So what is your family name? Do you mind sharing it with me? And they'll say. And then I'll go through this exercise because I struggle like you. All right? And then I'll say it a few times. And then I will say, and I know that I may mispronounce it again, but I will make every effort to pronounce your name correctly. And most of the time, people are very appreciative of that. Okay? But again, you know, I think you have to kind of gauge your students also. Okay? And sometimes if you know you're going to have difficulty pronouncing names, ask among the students. Anyone else have other experiences in that? Yes.
Sometimes if I know that I haven't maybe met the student yet, I'll look around online to see how that name might be pronounced.
Yes.
And then, so I come to the class already knowing, maybe hopefully already knowing how to pronounce the name without then having to engage in that side conversation, like, is this how you, or publicly saying to the group, oh, I'm terrible with names, can you just tell me how to say it?
And I have done that myself. In fact, I did it this morning because there was a name on one of my citations that I wasn't sure I could pronounce correctly. I Googled how to pronounce dum-dum, and it said, that's what I mean, okay? And so, to the extent that that is available, I'd say, look for it, okay? Referring to a woman's behavior as the B word or bossy, and a man's behavior as an example of strong leadership. Men are more likely to interrupt and talk over women. It happens, you know, it's happened to me at different points in my life. But there are times when I'm among white women and they talk over. And I remember once with the Advance grant, this is a National Science Foundation grant for advancing participation of women in STEM. And, you know, I was part of the grant management team, mostly women scientists, all white, and one other African-American male who wasn't in the room at the time, and there was all this talking going on. And, you know, and I'm just sitting there, and this was like the sixth week of the grant, and I'm just like, you know, and then finally I said, you know, I come out of a culture where you don't speak over each other, and especially in a professional environment. And what's happening right now is making me very uncomfortable, and I don't feel that I can speak. Well, the response to me was, well, that's what we do, you know? And I said, and I wanted to say to myself, is that because you came into the field of engineering and that's what engineers do? Or is that culturally within the white race, or as white women that's what you do? What is it you mean that's what you do? Because as a woman out of the African American culture, the only time that we are talking over each other is on a holiday at home or someone's funeral. But it's not in a professional setting. And I had to take that moment to explain some things, and then a white woman said, well, what I think Paulette is trying to say, and I said, hold it just a minute. And I'll tell you exactly what I said. I said, I don't need white women talking for me. Now, that was strong, but in that moment I felt if this work is going to persist, I had to say, and women are not monolithic, okay? Because you needed to understand in that moment, the assumption was that as women, this is what we do. No, perhaps for some of you, and maybe that's not true for all the women that are sitting in this room. Anyway, long story short, I felt almost, some will say, macro-invalidated, or an attempt was. And that was when I said, what does my brain tell me? Fight. So it was to respond. Using the phrase gay to refer to something weird, unusual, or boring. They can happen within groups, not only across them. You don't look or act like. Oh, I used to get that a lot. This happened to a classroom once. Muslim student wearing hijab. I hope you don't have a bomb under there. A faculty member said that to the student. Okay. Humor is generally tricky. Insisting on helping a person with a disability that has not asked for help. You ever find yourself wanting to grab a chair that someone is willing in and help them get across the street because you think the light's going to turn? Or you think you're being helpful? Maybe not something as direct as that, but a person with a cane, okay, with a visual impairment, blind, okay. Sometimes it's important to ask. Sometimes they may ask. Sometimes it's more important for us to ask before we assume. Okay? As I like to say to folks, individuals, not all, but many people who are in chairs have been chair users their entire life. They've figured out ways to navigate. If they need your help, they'll ask for it. We often experience our campuses differently as women, persons of color, minoritized groups, isolating, alienating, stressful, risky. Okay, the only one, etc. Here's some. This was taken from a qualitative study that we did on our campus of tenured system faculty of color. If I'm in a meeting, very often I've got to fight for voice. So that's the microaggression. This is funny. Sometimes I'll say something that's totally ignored, and then somebody else will say it, and then it's acknowledged, and then I will say, I thought I just said that. Or somebody will say for me, as Paulette said, you know, blah, 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 blah. So fighting for voice, again, is the microaggression. You ever have that happen? Mm-hmm. Yep. I see a few heads nodding here. I would emphasize that the gender dynamic is one that is definitely problematic. One of the weird things that we have in our department is we have an extremely senior faculty member who constantly says things out in the open that are sexist or racist against multiple groups, and nobody does anything about it because they sort of chalk it up like, oh, he's so old and he's kind of lost his mind. You know, that's kind of how they treated it. So we're not going to take action against this person. That's what she was saying. So we just let it roll. We just let it persist. That's okay. No. All right. So devaluing what I do think it's the case, especially for women, that the research is less respected on the whole here than the research that men do, even though, in my opinion, women are actually doing the more impactful research in the department. Okay, sometimes we go there. Our defense mechanism is to boast up our own, okay? But from her perspective, maybe the women were doing the more impactful research in the department. Devaluing. There are implicit kinds of questions that make it seem as if the work that is done by faculty of color does not carry the same weight as work of white faculty. Now, interrupting, I'm going to give you a few tips, and then we're near the end here because we are over. Alien in one's own land to a Latin American. Where are you from? How do you intervene? This goes back to the question of I'm curious about something, or how I pronounce a name. I'm just curious, what makes you ask that? Where are you from? Ask the speaker to elaborate. This will give you more information about where they're coming from, so I don't want to assume anything. It may also help the speaker become aware of what they're saying. Ascription of intelligence to an Asian person. You're all good in math, i.e. our person from the University of Illinois, Chicago. You're all good in math. Can you help me with this problem? I've never done it before. I heard you say that all Asians are good in math. What makes you believe that? Say more about that. Can you elaborate on your point? Colorblindness, I don't believe in race. So what do you believe in? Can you elaborate? Okay? So there are ways that we can intervene not only for ourselves but for others when you see these things happening. The more aware you become of your own biases and the way that others inflict microaggressions on others, the more we can intervene, which is part of why we're doing this. Okay? The value in you being here is to begin to recognize the ways in which your behavior and that of others impact the quality of life or the experience in the workplace or the classroom. And so are the things that you can do, absolutely. I don't want you feeling guilty. I don't want you walking out of here feeling like, oh Lord, she's beat up on us, and now it's like my shoulders are bent over and I just can't go through the day like this. Come on now, okay? It's not about feeling guilty. It's about acknowledging, because what I do here is say to you, I have them. I engage in them. And I do this work on a campus for 20 years. And even before then, I was doing this work. I'm a lawyer also, for whatever that means to you. So I don't want to feel guilty about it. I recognize it. Guilt tends towards inaction. Okay? What we want you to do is begin to recognize them, and there's plenty of research out there that will help you, and I will share my bibliography with the group. Reducing it, the brain is continually reorganizing itself. What are some of the things that I said about my own work? You know, I keep processing what I'm feeling, and when it happens in that moment, I stop myself and I say, what did you just do, Paulette? What I'm trying to do, maybe I am hardwiring for happiness. What I'm trying to do is say, you know what, I don't want that automatic control processing to influence how my interactions are with others, okay? I want to change those. Learn to recognize your own biases, know yourself, your own triggers, okay? Do the implicit association test. Do more than one. They only take about 10 minutes. Recognize the impact of them. We've talked about that. You know when it happens. Other ways to reduce intergroup contact. Being able to develop enough trust with others that when you can have that authentic conversation with your peers, do it. Engage it. You know, ask them, can you talk a little bit more about that? Help me understand something here. You know, I'm struggling with this. Be open to feedback from others. Okay? Practice, Mike. No. And encourage others to do the same. All right. I'm sorry. This is too much work to try to do in an hour. If you want to stick around, if you have some questions, I'm happy to answer them. But you're a wonderful group of people. I appreciate you. Don't know, you need to understand. The fact that you're here is important. Okay? I mean, this is valued work. And it is work. All right? But if you don't do it, what happens? If you don't do it and engage others, what happens? I see what's happening. After 20 years of doing this work, I know it's getting better in our spaces. I fear some of the things that are going on externally right now and the impact that it's having, but it's also mobilizing others. Okay? It's mobilizing our students. It's mobilizing folks like you who are in the space saying, you know, let me figure this out. All right? And so keep figuring it out. So thank you.